Bruce, come on up because I know you're about to have a conversation here with some chairs. What's the conversation about?
We're going to have our first panel. We're going to talk about World 4.0, let's get ready. But the idea is not the normal talk of a data-driven smart city, but a smart city that's reflective of people. So we're going to have 3 people that are going to give us a sense of what does that mean from a New York perspective, from a York, Pennsylvania perspective, and the idea is to have it interactive, but we want to, in response to what the lady said, we've been hearing a lot of bad things about technology. We want to talk about some good things as far as what technology driven by thoughtful people can make happen in people's lives.
And why is that conversation important right now, by the way?
I think it's a counterpoint to creating hope. I think a great deal of us don't have hope, and I think it's important to understand that hope is in the future.
Fantastic. Well, guess what? Magically, 4 chairs have arrived. So I'll leave it up to you, my friend Bruce.
All right, thanks, Richard. So, World 4.0, smart cities. This is going to be a conversation with Courtney Cogburn. She's an assistant professor of sociology and social work at Columbia University. Could we have Courtney come up, please? And what we're going to do is we're going to have a conversation for about 30 minutes and then 10 minutes of interactive discussion where we're going to really seek your thoughts, and you'll have a chance as well interact with our prominent speakers. And she's joined by her little boy, Dara. Courtney as well will be joined by John McElligott, founder of York Exponential, doing some tremendous things where it's not robots taking jobs, it's people getting jobs creating robots. John, do you want to come out? We call him Mac for short. All right, my brother. And then we're really pleased to have a long-standing friend of Silicon Harlem's, one of our homeboys, John Paul Farmer, the new acting CTO of the City of New York. Let's give him a round of applause. John, come on out. So because we have 2 Johns, we're going to do, he's JP, Mac, and we have Courtney. So could you all just briefly introduce yourselves, state your affiliation, just to start out with, please.
Hi, I'm Courtney Cogburn. I'm an associate professor at the Columbia University School of Social Work. I, in one area of my life, focus on the effects of racism on health, but in another area, I think about how we leverage emerging technologies to better help people understand inequality and engage around issues of racism. So I do work in virtual reality as well as in data science. And I also recently co-founded a new laboratory at Columbia, the Justice, Equity, and Technology Lab with my colleague Desmond Patton, that is intending to better integrate social work and social workers into emerging technologies. And I'm happy to be here.
Matt, give us a brief one of yourself.
Great. Can everyone hear me okay? All right. I am John McElligott. I'm the CEO of York Exponential. We're what's called a collaborative robotics company. So these human-sized robots are smaller, designed to work next to people, not replace them. I'm also the president of the Fortress Academy. So we're a licensed higher education institution, first of its kind. It's accelerated education in artificial intelligence and robotics combined with traditional manufacturing skills. So like welding, fabrication, with the goal of creating the first generation of robot mechanics. I also am the president of the Fortress Initiative. We're a nonprofit that is dedicated to making sure that third-tier cities, so cities of 100,000 or less, and rural communities do not get left behind by the Fourth Industrial Revolution. And I'm also the CEO of York Exponential Development. We're spearheading a 768,000 square foot innovation district in the center of our town, York, Pennsylvania. If you've ever had a peppermint patty, that's how everybody knows us. And it will be the first innovation district where humans and robots will work side by side.
JP.
Hey everybody, this is the largest chair I've ever been in. Quite the experience here. Spare no expense. So hi, I'm John Paul Farmer. I'm the Chief Technology Officer of New York City. I've been in this role for a little over 4 months now. And when people ask me, well, what does that mean? What do you do? We're helping make government more effective, more efficient, more responsive to the needs of the people of New York. And you look at the vision that Mayor de Blasio has laid out. It's to make New York City the fairest big city in the United States of America. And we believe that technology is a really important tool to make that happen. But it all comes back to people, because I think we just heard from some folks on the stage, what is a city if not the people? And so we're working to ensure that government agencies have the tools they need, the tech quotient, the TQ. Everyone knows about IQ and EQ, but we're thinking about the tech quotient that exists in these rooms where people are making decisions about how they're going to serve the people of New York. Because in the 21st century, if you want the policies to work, you want these policies out to help people, that means the technology has to work. And likewise, if you want the technology to work, the policies have to be right too. And so that's what we're doing. We're working in collaboration with the mayor, the deputy mayors, all the agencies, and really importantly, the communities across our city to ensure that we're delivering technology that works for people.
Thanks, John. Let me briefly ask the audience, how many people here know what the fourth industrial revolution is? Please raise your hand if you do. Well, let me ask Matt quickly. Matt, could you just synopsize what the fourth industrial revolution is, what it means, and why it's so important that we make sure everyone's involved?
Sure, great. So just to put it in context, so the theory is that were 4 very distinct industrial revolutions. The first was steam, so that powered a lot of factories and machines. The next was electrical. So as the spread of electricity spread, cities and towns began to communicate differently. The third industrial revolution was like the internet, mobile technology, computers, and that's traditionally where you see a lot of communities got left behind. You know, the first and second industrial revolutions were really great. It was the risk takers, so the people that had built the companies, and then the kids took over and became caretakers. So a lot of new technologies were seen as a risk instead of an opportunity, and so that kind of swept across the whole of the United States, where a lot of people began to get left behind. The fourth industrial revolution, and we're about probably 5 years into it right now, is the Internet of Things, quantum computing, robotics, artificial intelligence, a lot of emerging technologies. And I don't think what people understand is, while we're at the very beginning of this, a year now is going to be worth 5 years. And it's starting to get truncated as we go from the fourth industrial revolution, which is where we're entering now, and very quickly we'll be into the fifth. And I mean, but it will happen within our lifetimes. It won't happen over the period of 100, 200 years. Innovation will begin to move very, very quickly. And so the fourth industrial revolution really is the beginning of the digital and the physical worlds colliding. And so that's why it's important to have this discussion now, because right now we have haves and have-nots, but if we don't do this right, we might have haves and have-nevers. And so that's why this is so important and so exciting.
Thanks, Mac. Let's give him a hand. I hope that really helped everyone to get a sense of what we mean by this and why it's so urgent. Courtney, what is missing from your perspective as far as being considerate of the average citizen when you hear the common discussions that are held around smart cities and what that means?
I think what I appreciate is the discourse around involving everyone, bringing everyone in. I think what concerns me is the lack of people at the tables who have power to make decisions, who really work in community or grounded in community, people from the most vulnerable communities being involved in those discussions. So rather than being sort of top-down decisions being made on behalf of vulnerable populations, I think more of those communities need to be at the decision-making tables to better inform the processes that we implement. So a smart city, a fair city, has to involve people from all ranges of our society. Otherwise, we're going to make some very problematic decisions about where we're going. And I think what is concerning to me is the belief that our good intentions of wanting to help people will be sufficient to get us there. If you can't, it's very sort of patronizing in some ways, that you can't help people, you can't help communities that you're not part of and that you don't understand. They have to be at the table if we're really wanting to have an equitable, fair society, economy, etc.
JP, what's your take on that? And what can you add as you're trying to address some of these issues from the city's standpoint?
For sure, I'll just build on exactly what Courtney started with, which is that to be a smart city, we have to include everybody. Because if you're not including everyone, that's not that smart. We've got about 1 million people in New York City who have disabilities. So when you think of the physical city, if we're going to do that in a smart way, it's got to include those million people. You look at the unemployment rate among people with disabilities, it is way too high, way too high. And we need to start thinking about how we make a city that's inclusive to everybody. And then you move to the digital world, and that's got to be inclusive too. You heard from the stage earlier today some of the numbers in Brooklyn, in the Bronx, nationwide. The work that my office has done has shown that across New York City, 29% of households do not have broadband at home. And there are a variety of reasons for that. There's no silver bullet here. There are a whole bunch of reasons that cause this. For some folks, it's affordability. For some folks, it's that literally they can't access it. And for others, it's that they don't understand the value. They don't see, well, why would I do that? And I think a lot of us in this room understand that access to education, access to economic opportunity, more and more, that's happening online. Children are getting homework that's collaborative and done online. And so if you don't have that in your home, the whole family can fall behind. And so that's why we're so focused on closing the digital divide and ensuring that we're working with communities. We're working with the 508 computer centers across New York City. So this is the park rec centers, the senior centers, the libraries, to ensure that they're delivering quality education, certainly, but also inclusion. So moving from digital literacy to digital inclusion to make sure everybody's involved in our community, everybody can access the resources that the city provides, but also that private sector organizations, nonprofits, academia provides. And so again, back to this question of how do we make sure that everyone's included, both in our physical city, but also in our digital world, which is just increasingly where we're spending time. That's how we make a smart city.
Thank you, JP. Mac, the York Plan, how is that a model for World 4.0, and is it replicable to NYC? Could you share that with us, please?
Yeah, so I guess I'll set a little bit of context. So most people, even in New York, did not know what the York Plan was, but in the spring of 1940, before the United States had entered World War II, most of the nation wanted nothing to do with it. We'd become very isolationist. The Nazis weren't on our doorstep. This was something that was happening far away. But for some reason, the leaders in New York realized that whether they wanted the war or not, it was coming. So 4 families were nominated from within the manufacturing community, and they were given 6 months and 3 guiding principles to come up with a plan. The first is everything from now on is about facing this one challenge. Doesn't matter if people say it's not coming, doesn't matter if they say it's not our problem. This is going to be an enormous problem, and we need to get ready, and we're not. The second is, for the time being, we put aside all political differences. So the United States was incredibly divided back then, just like it's divided right now. And it wasn't that people had to pretend to like each other or even say they agreed on everything, but there was this thing that was about to happen that was larger than any one of them could handle on their own. So for the time being, we had to put aside those political differences and find a way to work together. And the third was, with all grace, they'd seek advice and counsel from every member of society. So you had the owners of the companies sitting down with workers, the wealthiest people sitting down with the poorest people. Even kids were involved, because they knew a plan that didn't include everyone would be an incomplete plan. So after 6 months and using these 3 guiding principles, they drafted what would later be called the York Plan. And it's a 15-point outline, and at its center is, one side of it is focused on people, so it's worker housing, health, education, and the other side was a lot of stuff Silicon Valley's been doing, so maker spaces. People, manufacturing became Uberized, so companies traded the downtime of their equipment. Before they were competitors, now they were partners. And very quickly, in fact, almost the whole of Pennsylvania made about 1/3 of everything in World War II thanks to the York Plan. When war was declared, the president did not have a plan, so we sent out a request for proposals, and the York Plan was adopted by default because it's the only one in motion and not on paper. So no one in New York could tell me what this was. There was a big mural in a McDonald's parking lot. Nobody had any idea that this had happened. So I had to go through boxes in the History Center basement, and I started finding all these newspaper clippings. And so we realized that just like in 1940, there was this large challenge that we weren't going to be able to face alone. And so essentially what we're doing is repurposing the York Plan into the York Plan 2.0. One of the big spreading messages was do what you can with what you have and spread through Rotary clubs. So what we've been doing is repurposing the pieces that we have in central Pennsylvania, but this time around making American-made robotics. We believe that robots made in overseas are a national security issue, and they are. They're very easy to hack. As the baby boomers retire, cheap robots will flood the market. If they're not built, installed, maintained in the United States, that leaves us wide open. So I think probably one of the lessons from the York Plan, and I've seen this in lots of communities, is that nobody is coming to save us. And we just have to realize that while the government can do a lot of amazing things, it's going to take all of us working together to make this happen. So the main crux of the York Plan and the York Plan 2.0 is do what you can with what you have. So we need to find a way to repurpose what we've got. And our largest asset is our people. You talked about a smart city. A city without citizens is just a bunch of buildings. So you can throw as much technology at it as you want. You can throw as much infrastructure, add sensors to everything. But if your folks are not included and exposed and educated, you don't have a smart city. You just have a bunch of buildings. So that idea from the first York Plan and that we're using in the second, I think do what you can with what you have. I think you guys have a lot here. Just to see how fast you guys have grown over the last several years and to see some of the big moves and the discussions we're having now. Like, we'd never have a tech company having a discussion about people. Do you know what I mean? It's always engineers. So I think to do what you can with what you have, and you guys are doing it.
Thanks, Mac. Let's give him a hand. That's exciting. What I want to do is have Courtney tell you a bit more about how she's bringing together the work at the School of Social Work at Columbia with technology. And then I want to then segue over to JP and get his sense of some of what Mac said about the York Plan. And then we'll just continue the conversation. Courtney, would you like to really share with the audience what you're doing that's groundbreaking?
Okay. So part of what we're doing, a colleague of mine, Desmond Patton, and I have been working in technology for at least a few years. I do work, again, in virtual reality. I've created a piece called A Thousand Cut Journey that puts you in the digital shoes of a black male as a child and adolescent and as an adult experiencing racism in different forms and different contexts over time. And as a psychologist, we're interested in what effect does that have on someone who goes through a first-person experience like that. Not that they would ever understand what it's like to be a black man if that's not your lived experience, but does this sort of visceral power that we can get with virtual reality help people change the ways in which they engage questions of race and racism in society? My colleague Desmond Patton does work with machine learning where he's used former gang members, community members to help create algorithms to better assess patterns of language online, expressed on social media in particular. And using this approach, is able to determine that there's a cycle of grief that happens online before violence happens offline. And it's giving community workers a better point of intervention using social media data to identify grief as a trigger for violence and intervening on violence before it happens. So really, these are two examples of what social workers might do with technology. I had never used virtual reality when I wrote the proposal to fund our project. So it wasn't about having the technical expertise. It was really about building the right team, the right kinds of collaborations, leveraging different types of expertise and perspective to reimagine how we might be using tech. So that's one piece of it. Another piece that I'll mention quickly is we're talking about inclusion, and I think that's important. We also have to talk about justice and equity, and those are different things. Redressing past inequalities won't be remedied by including people from this point forward. We should be actively thinking about how do we help address some of the past inequities that we've already created, leveraging technology, leveraging this fourth industrial revolution. And so I think social workers are particularly skilled at thinking about work with vulnerable, oppressed populations, thinking about legacies of oppression, as well as in translating research into practice in meaningful ways. And so we're trying to better position social workers to engage in this space for the sake of everyone, honestly.
So I think what Courtney just pointed out is really, really important. And when we look at the role technology is playing in society, it can't simply be we build some technology and then we throw at it some equity and some ethics at the end. It's got to be that we start by bringing everybody in to design the future that they want together. And so one small example of that is here in New York City, where my office has been doing what we call co-labs. These are neighborhood-based innovation labs, going into some communities here in New York City that are historically under-resourced and overlooked, and identifying from the people who live there what their priorities are, and then working with them to co-design a way technology might help address that inequity. And so we've seen some really great results in Brownsville in particular, where safety at night has been a focus. We have a formal launch coming up in the next couple of weeks of a pilot that uses smart lighting on Central Business District on Belmont there, and also in the plazas where digital arts are being displayed by projectors. So illuminating, livening up the community, and in the process, helping young people from the community gain skills that, one, give them an outlet, a way to express themselves, but also could give them skills that might lead to career opportunities down the road. So that's one small example here in New York City. I think there are much bigger questions around how we ensure that technology does not have embedded bias in it. That as we go about using more machine learning to fuel efficiencies and services that might make life easier, not just easier, might make life better, might help us find missing children, might help us catch criminals more quickly. But we have to make sure that's done in a way that the data underlying all of that is representative, is fair, and we are not actually creating more harm or discrimination through the application of these technologies. So really important that we bring everybody into the design early on so that we don't simply end up encoding bias that already exists in the less technical approaches that we have today. Now, going back to what John was saying about do the most with what you have today. And that's one of the things we're trying to do here in New York City right now. So today is kicking off the following 7 days, which are Library Privacy Week here in New York City. This is the second annual time that we've done this. And looking at these incredible resources we have, this library system, and thinking about how do we ensure that this is helping deliver what people need today so they can protect their own privacy, their data privacy online, and live a healthier life as they engage increasingly on their mobile phones. And so that's an example of looking at what we have today, the resources that we have in place, and starting there. And from that, we're going to be able to include more people, because more people are going to have that base of knowledge and understanding and be able to engage in some of these key conversations that are going to shape this digital world and the smart city that we're going to live in the future.
Let's give him a round of applause. So we've sort of set, if you will, the barometer for what we believe from a values standpoint needs to happen as far as the fourth industrial revolution. What I would like each of you to do now is, as you see things as they are, what are the things that you're seeking to put in place over the next several months which you think will help achieve some of the positive outcomes that we would like to see, and which then create the means whereby we all can get involved? John, do you want to?
Sure thing. So the main thing that I'm focused on, as I was telling some folks backstage, is hiring. So we're building capacity within your government, here, your municipal government, to ensure that we've got technologists at the table, along with all the great people who've been there for a long time doing policy work, to ensure that we can deliver on what we want, which is to make this the fairest big city in America. I'd say beyond that, going back to collabs, we're looking at how we scale some of these ways that we're engaging with communities. Because we recognize in a city of 8.6 million people, 1.1 million school children, the scale of New York City is massive, and we need to get better at creating feedback loops that allow us to stay in touch with not just one community at a time, but many. And so I'd say that's another thing that we're going to be focusing on in the months to come.
Mac.
Yeah, so it's encouraging to hear some of the discussions that are happening right now and some of the initiatives. I think one of the big things that we're pushing, and it's why I was excited to come here and participate with you all, is I think the discussion needs to go beyond different communities. The problem we're about to face is going to face all of us equally. I mean, and it's going to happen fast, like a lot faster than I think most people anticipate. So the big thing that I'm going to continue to do is to be traveling, to meeting with folks like you in different communities, trying to share best practices, because the truth is we're a lot more alike. Like when artificial intelligence, robotics, quantum computing, all this begins to move, it's going to be a great leveler. Like it's going to go like this and it's going to flatten. And there's a misunderstanding with people now that think, well, I'm not tech savvy, so that's not for me. The technology does not care. You know, the thing that terrifies me the most is when I talk to folks and they're like, I'll be out of the workforce by then, and my grandkids will be fine. Look how they can use that iPad. And I'm like, just because your kid can use an iPad does not make them a genius.
That's
but
right.
there is
That's
this
not a
thought
skill.
that because they can, what it makes them is a good consumer. So if we're not doing this correctly, this will not be the generation that saves us. This will be the generation that is the most easily manipulated. And it's incredibly important. I liken it to, I've talked to a lot of folks, and they have master's degrees and PhDs, but they're older, and they're like, oh, my kids are smarter than me. And I was like, your kids are not smarter, they just grew up there. If you go to another country and you can't speak the language, the people that can speak the language there are not smarter than you. They just grew up there. And so there is a huge misunderstanding of how important it is for everybody to be involved, regardless of your age, your race, your socioeconomic background. Again, this technology doesn't care, but everyone has something to contribute. So that's what I'm really hoping, is that people will understand just because you can't code does not mean there is not a place for you in the fourth industrial revolution. It is necessary for all of us, because a lot of the kids, there are skill sets that they don't have because they didn't go through the same trials and tribulations. Like, everything was different. So do not think digital skills are going to solve all of the problems. These are going to create socioeconomic divides that, unlike we've ever seen, or it can create levels of prosperity that were only imagined. No more poverty, no more starvation. I mean, this is the real opportunity that we're facing, but we need to understand that it's urgent and everybody needs to be included. So that's the big hope for me, is that organizations like Silicon Harlem and organizations and city governments all begin to work together, because this is a problem that is going to affect all of us, and it needs all of us for the solution.
We need a mic for the question. Thank you, Matt. Courtney.
Yeah, I can't second that enough. I think that framing and the way that we approach this work
want to go now.
okay, just a second, is critical, right? And it's not just a matter of avoiding bias, it's doing good, it's achieving equity. And if we're going to do that, we have to think about that very clearly at the very beginning. We have to have an anti-racist, anti-oppressive lens in the work that we're doing, right? I like to argue that if it's not anti-racist, it's probably racist. If you're not actively thinking about how do we avoid continuing and extending existing oppressions, then we're just going to exacerbate it at a speed that we've never even imagined. And so, but we have the opposite opportunity to create equity and equality in ways that we never even thought were possible. So that really is what I think the role of social work is. That's what social workers do. That's what social workers strive for. And so really trying to prepare and train our students to be better engaged in this work. And I've seen them in the classroom. We started a new emerging technologies, media and society minor for our graduate students. And I see them in the classroom. They're trying to question, do I have the technical expertise I need to engage in this space? What's the level of coding that I need to understand? And we're trying to push. That's helpful to know, but you have something to contribute already. You already have an important knowledge base to contribute to what we understand about how to work with these communities. And our communities have the knowledge base about their own lives. If we're going to try and help and serve, we have to involve them in this process. And so everything that I'm doing and have been doing over the past several years is geared in that direction. So it's really delightful to hear more people thinking about and framing it in this way. And I think the model of collabs that's come out of your office, John, is a really important one, right? It's thinking about how do you bring different areas of expertise together around a single problem and try and work and solve that problem together that's really grounded in a single community. And then thinking about how to scale that is really important. I hope other people start to take on that kind of model in the work that they're trying to do.
Let's give him a round of applause. So I'm going to take moderator's prerogative, and we've mentioned the fact that we're doing work in St. Nicholas houses. We're doing a program called Youth Code the Future. It's multi-agency. It includes the Center for Court Innovations. It includes the NYCHA Housing Residents Association. And we have two key people that help make that happen. One is Judith Desir. She's our instructor for Silicon Harlem. Could you please stand up, Judith? Judith is also an avid bicyclist and leads bike tours, as well as helps set up community composting, community gardens. But she's been working closely over the past several months, going from July to August, to help develop with 10 young people the first interactive website that's a community kind of news outlet for St. Nicholas housing. And we also have Tashawn Underwood, who is one of the lead students. Please stand up. He's even wearing his Mayor Action Plan sweatshirt. So he's going to be helping to maintain the website. So we wanted to just make sure that these sorts of folks who are doing this work in the community, on that ground floor level get get recognized. Why don't we now start to field questions? I think we have laid the groundwork for what can be an interesting interaction. So please raise your hands if you have a question, and Ethan will come by with the microphone.
JP, this is a question for you. I'm assuming that you have a background in corporate America. As CTO of New York City, there's a lot of bureaucracy. I commend you for the work that's being done in Brownsville. I am also a person in the room that grew up in community housing in Brownsville, so I know very much about the blight that exists there. I also know about the up-and-coming opportunities that exist there. What are the biggest challenges that you are seeing for lack of my knowledge of technology in the way that you are contributing at New York City? I would imagine that there's infrastructure problems, enterprise systems that may not exist where different databases can talk to each other in an enterprise system. So what are your biggest challenges as CTO as you try to tackle all of these projects?
Yeah, thanks so much for the question. There are challenges inside of government, and there are challenges across society. So I'd say inside of government, we're looking at a lot of legacy technology. So you've got a variety of different agencies that might have procured different systems at different times. And so to your point, it can be hard for them to talk to one another. And there's been work going on to improve that, but that's a process that's still going on, and we're kind of always looking back and saying we've got this technical debt for the choices that were made previously, and now we're kind of living with choices that were made in the 80s or 90s or early 2000s. And that's just a reality here in New York City and frankly in every government. Across society, I think the biggest challenge is the gaps in information and access. And so whether we're talking about the digital divide and we're specifically talking about people being online, whether that's at home or on the go, and there are other gaps though. There are gaps in terms of educational, certainly, in terms of what curriculum people have access to, depending on which school they go to, which depends on which neighborhood they live in, so that can reinforce some of the inequities that we're trying to address. And there are even gaps in terms of how much technology is valued. I think John brought up some really good points about, some folks might look at this and say, well, that's not my thing. That doesn't matter. It doesn't really affect me. I don't have a job in technology, and maybe it's not my generation. But the reality is this already affects all of us, and it's going to affect all of us more and more and more. And so we need to close some of these gaps across society and ensure that everybody has access not just to the tools, but also to the understanding of what they can do with those tools.
Thanks, John. Next question, please.
Hello, my name is Howard Horowitz. I've been to this conference many years. It just gets better and better and better and much more relevant, and actually amazingly keeps pace with technology changes that we need to deal with. I know it's part of the agenda today, but perhaps right now we could connect up everything you've said about the fourth industrial revolution and connect it to sustainability and climate justice, which is the next impending doomsday scenario that could overtake us if we don't, as you said, apply the resources we have now to and focus on that issue. And how does that connect up with technology in the city as well to make it a sustainable city?
So I guess I'll start from my perspective on the larger scale. So I've been in robotics for a while right now. I did have a tech company before my last company, so I've been in technology. But the idea of I understand that the technology that I'm developing will cause some disruption. I do. And now I'm doing my best to make sure that I'm doing it in a responsible way, so responsible disruption. But the upside, if we get this right, is incredible. Like, robots could be used to clean the oceans. I mean, there are so many amazing things that we can do with this technology, but it has to be done at such a massive scale that it can't just be me, it can't just be another technology company, it can't be just a few of us. I think one of the largest ways this can work, and this technology could be used to solve a lot of these problems, is the awareness of the average person so that they can vote in the correct way to make sure that it's large policy changes, right? Politicians will go with whatever the voters want. And if the voters are not talking about using technology responsibly to solve some of these problems, and you start disconnecting all of the things so they become niche issues, I think that's probably the first thing we've got to do is make sure that everybody, as you said, understands not how necessarily the technology works, but how important it is. So I think we are probably for the first time at a point where technology used responsibly at scale very rapidly could begin to solve some of these problems. In fact, I don't know how else we will, quite frankly. I don't know if we try and use just the resources we've got and use it in the way we always have. I don't think we can fix these problems. But the combination of, I think, the will of the people, a lot of smart and motivated people getting together, and then on large levels using artificial intelligence, robotics, these technologies, quantum computing, to start tackling some of these problems now, probably is our only hope. So on a large scale, I'm incredibly optimistic. But I think it's going to take more folks like you guys making everybody aware that this is important, and it's possible if we all move in that same direction. From the city perspective, I guess I'll let you take it from there.
Sure thing. So thank you for the question. It's a great
Yeah,
question.
it's a fantastic question.
Back in April, the mayor released One NYC, which is also known as the Green New Deal for New York City. This is a roadmap for the next few decades of how New York City should be improving itself. And such a big part of this is how we use technology to reduce our carbon footprint as a community. And we're making good progress. A lot of this has been informed by the Mayor's Office of Sustainability, my colleagues at the Mayor's Office of Resiliency. There are a number of folks who have been working on this in the last few years. But I think we have to recognize we're in early days still. And so while we've got some investments that were made by the New York City Economic Development Corporation in urban tech hubs, there's one in Brooklyn, one in Manhattan, those are incubating startups and companies that are trying to use technology to do exactly what you're talking about. But we've got so far to go. And we've got to keep thinking about how we apply technology in a way that is equitable, is not just benefiting one part of our broader community, but everybody. But keeping everybody involved. Again, whether they're startups, whether they're nonprofits, academics, or city agencies, on this path, on this plan, this One NYC Green New Deal, where we know what we need to do, and increasingly we actually do have access to a lot of the tools that can help us do it, and it's so often making those connections across sectors, identifying business models that make sense, and changing some rules and regulations to ensure that we continue to make progress on this path forward.
Yeah, that was a great question. Thank you.
To Sean, you have a question?
Yeah, how do y'all, what's the plan, how do you, I guess the way I can phrase it is, how can the mass gain or grasp perspective of the project or the up-and-coming troubles and severity if they don't understand it? Does that make sense?
Yeah. Yeah. So one of so this is it gets a little touchy because I know Bruce, you wanted to keep it all optimistic, and so
No. We want to keep it realistic.
Okay. So the reality is, if you look at history, if you look at the First World War, you look at the Second World War, almost all of the same conditions are here now. I mean, an explosion in technology, a rise in nationalism. I mean, it's all very similar to what's happening right now. So typically, if you want a massive group of the population all to move in the same direction and in the same way, there needs to be a crisis that happens almost overnight. And so if you look at the emergence of technology in places like China, the destabilization that's happening in different regions of the world, the miscommunication with technologies like deepfakes, I mean, there is a huge crisis probably that is about to face us. And so you need to get to the point where people are willing to do things even if they don't understand everything. And when times are good, people make that decision. This isn't my thing. I'm not techie. I'm not whatever. We'll look back to World War II, and those people weren't warriors. Like those people weren't supposed to be in the military. But when something large enough happens that you realize that I don't need to understand everything, I just need to understand that we need to act. Typically, it takes a massive, massive thing. And I hope that I'm wrong, but that's probably going to be the thing. There will be something of such a large scale that happens that everyone will just snap out of it and realize that this is massively important and we need to move in this direction. So that's typically what it takes for everybody to move in that direction. My hope is, though, that if we can utilize technology and broadband and communication, maybe we can do it through rapid communication, maybe. But historically, it's been something that's a large enough crisis that is going to affect your life immediately, that gets people to go, put our differences aside, I don't have to understand everything, but I know we've got to fix this. So my hope is that we can do it as a community of communities, but realistically through history, it's been a large enough crisis. And I don't think we've had our Sputnik moment yet. Like China did. Like, China saw the advancements in AI, and they started the Made in China 2025 initiative. If you guys haven't read that, you should check it out. But we haven't had that. I don't think our generation's had that Sputnik moment yet. Like, we haven't had that, but it's coming. And what that is, I'm not sure.
So every good panel has some disagreement. I think that moment's here. A lot of people would say it's the climate crisis. That is the thing where we should all be aligning together and pushing against the same thing because it threatens all of us. But that doesn't seem to be happening, at least not enough. We do see some change, some momentum. But I think one of the challenges is that it seems to be creeping. It doesn't seem to be a moment. It wasn't an attack on Pearl Harbor. It wasn't 9/11. It wasn't a day that you can point to. And so I think that's one of the big challenges in activating people.
Right.
But I also want to agree with something that John said, which is that we've been through a lot of things like this before. And they're not all World War I. You look at the mechanization of farming. It used to be that 50% of the working people in America worked on farms to feed the people in our country. It's now 2%. And yet we don't have 48% unemployment. We've been able to adapt. Our economy has adapted to the changes in how technology is used across society. So when we look at automation and AI, in a lot of ways, these tools are going to make us happier and healthier. The big challenge is what John's pointed out, which is the speed. It's not going to happen over a generation or two. It's going to happen much faster. And so that's the challenge that we have, is how do we ensure that everybody has the skills to prosper in a changing economy? And we have to ask the question of, do the education systems that we have in place do that? Can we train somebody with skills when they're 18, 20 years old and expect those to last for 50 years? Or do we need to have mechanisms in place where people can go get new skills, lifelong learning? There are some things happening here in New York City, like the Mayor's Tech Talent Pipeline, which is led by a colleague of mine named Lauren Anderson. Work going on in the Department of Education to ensure that we're creating a more more flexible, agile mindset amongst the students. So there are a lot of things happening, but I think the big challenge that we are going to face, in addition to the climate crisis, is how do we adjust for an age of lifelong learning?
Unfortunately, we have to wrap up with those tremendous set of comments. I hope they drove some thinking for you. And what's now to happen is we're going to start with our Pitch Fest, beginning of the Harlem to Rwanda Pitch Fest. So someone will come out and then direct you to where that will be happening. But let's have a round of applause for Courtney, who had to take care of a little boy, John McElligott, and John Paul Farmer, and I'm your moderator, Bruce Lincoln. Thank you so much. They're going to be around. John will be around. JP has to leave, unfortunately, but if you have questions, you'll be able to catch up with them.
Thanks, Bruce.
Thanks, John.
Appreciate it.
That was fun, dude. Thanks, man. That was good.